do you say this? How do you say this without getting too crude? No, fuck no. What the fuck? So recently I did a video where I picked 5 books from a series. They're all romance books or erotica, depending, sort of to kind of read a genre that I don't normally read and sort of explore that and try to post a video on it and hopefully get all this stuff read and videos out before Valentine's Day. I've read The Lady and the Orc, and I was most intrigued and laughing the most about that one because of the concept, I guess. Not that the book is a joke or anything, because it's not. So I finished that book and I want to talk about it. The writer is Finley Finn, and it's a story about a woman who is married to a nobleman who treats her very poorly and wants her to give him children, and she has not been able to. He sort of leaves her at an estate. I don't remember if it's their estate, or he leaves her somewhere, with the servants while he goes off, and that area is attacked and raided by orcs, and she's captured by the orcs. Grimmar, the leader of the orcs, takes her as his own. The writing in this book is good. Finley Finn is a good writer. The story of it, the overall story, I have issues with. Maybe someone isn't reading this because they care a whole lot about the story. Maybe someone reads this, The Lady in New York, because of the erotica parts, and it definitely gets graphic. I mean, so if you're wondering, its steaminess is pretty high, and while the moment-to-moment writing was very good, the story, the overall story that were presented, the reasoning and the sort of series of actions and explanations for these actions and these characters' reactions to them, was fairly bland through most of the book. I don't expect a story like this to take a lot of chances. There was a section at the end that I think there was a moment where it kind of woke me up out of that, where I got kind of interested in the story, and I didn't like how it was handled after it had my attention. I do actually plan to spoil this book a bit. There's going to be a spoiler here, so I'm going to mark that off. I'm going to talk just a little bit more before I get to it. But if you plan on reading the book, then you're probably going to want to skip that. The erotic scenes, right, which is, I guess, the big draw for a story like this. I mean, those were, when I say were written, they were graphic without being gross. Sort of. It might be in your head of how consensual is this book, and I would say that it is consensual. There's never a time where it gets, where no one's forced. So that's an important thing, especially with a genre like this. The language that she uses to describe these encounters is never gross language, right? But the things that happen were pretty graphic sometimes, and I thought that was a bit interesting that it was so graphic about a very specific thing that seemed to happen a few times. Interesting. I thought that was pretty interesting. Just, again, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm new to this genre, very new to this genre, so maybe I'm making something of this that is nothing. And it's so, I don't have a lot of experience in the genre to really base this on to say, is this a normal thing? Sure, this is what'll happen. All right. But that sort of leads me into the romance side of it. And I just don't know. The romance didn't feel particularly strong. I recently had finished the Mer Lovers collection by Tasman Lay. The relationships of the characters in those stories was a lot more developed, and the romance side of it felt a lot more natural, and the progression seemed to make sense when those characters came together and they had sex or made love or whatever you want to say. It kind of meant something, it kind of, you kind of were with them. You kind of got swept away with that passion that they had for each other in that moment because of what had happened in their experiences, or because of the encounter, the discussions they'd had, things that had happened. Here, it felt a lot more about like horniness. This isn't just sort of like a series of one night stands these characters have together. The relationship is building, but it didn't. That romance side felt it didn't feel like it was. It felt like it happened, but it didn't feel as though I expected it to happen. I didn't feel that I was drawn into it as much. Moment to moment writing is good, but the overarching story just didn't. It often felt contrived. It didn't feel like scenes that were important or discussions that were important were that enough time was spent on them. There's a moment where one of the orcs is relating sort of some backstory to Jewel, and it was presented in such a cursory Cliff Notes version, just to be like, here's the outline of like what happened, and I really felt like that was a moment that we could have used a little bit more back and forth dialogue, where we could have developed that character just a little more, and we could have gotten that story from that character's mouth instead of sort of like as an omnipotent narrator, just sort of telling us that he told her. And so I thought that was a kind of a loss in that moment. Here we're finally getting a little more details on the history of orcs, and it was just very cursory to me. And it's sort of like, I know we're here for the lady and the orc. Those encounters are I know that the meat and the potatoes of this story, right? But the story, right? The story that we create, that's the plate that the meat and potatoes comes on. And nobody's going to be, we don't need to be eating these with our hands. There's supposed to be a plate, there's supposed to be, we agree that there would be a plate for dinner, right? My food would come on a plate. So I just felt like that story needed a little more development. It just felt like when there was an opportunity to do it, that we didn't take it. A critical reader could have said, hey, this seems a little hurried here. When it had my interest, it felt like those scenes were underwritten. And that, I would say that it needed in those areas about another 1,000 words or so, maybe 2,000, something. Just it needed a few more pages of those scenes, and those characters, the dialogue that those characters had needed to be refined a little bit, especially since one of the characters sort of Jewel seems to stay in her sort of slightly archaic dialogue, which is supposed to stand in place for sort of this medieval fantasy world that she exists in, and this other character who should be speaking at that same level or probably higher felt like he talked very modern all of a sudden, and maybe that was to make him look stupid and foolish and petty, which he is, but I don't think that it fit the scene. I think it undersold the scene, and I think that could have been. It was like I was ready for that scene. I was excited. I was invested. Right, it had my attention. I was invested, and those scenes just. I see that they could have paid off if a little more time had been spent with him, and if there another pass or two with the writing could have made that the setting, the ambiance, the what you do with these scenes and how you present them and the way that you build up to them all matters, right? That just these isolated sort of severed scenes by themselves with nothing else aren't sexy, right? If you just took these stories and just cut the sex out of them, they're not very sexy as that. They're just graphic. This is the part where I'm going to spoil the book pretty significantly. I don't think that a book like this really suffers too much by being spoiled. I mean, some people though, anything would spoil it for them. Don't trust me. What a thing to say. Don't trust me. If you are worried that spoiling it could mess up your experience, you can always revisit this if it's that important. But I definitely need to talk about this because I can't. I feel that I owe it in being critical to talk about specifics, and I just need to do that. So if I don't talk specifically about something, then I just kind of feel like I just sort of made an offhand comment and didn't support it, and it's sort of like just sort of mean-spirited, and I don't want to be that way. Here goes a spoiler. There are 3 scenes near the end of the book that I really felt like were an issue. So, a little background. Jewel becomes pregnant, and so Grimmar, the orc leader, he wants to make peace with the humans. So they're in negotiations. Okay? And Jewel's husband, Lord Nor, says that he will not agree to this orc peace unless Jewel is returned to him. And Jewel and Grimmar both know and state that if Jewel goes back to him, if she returns to him, that Grimmar's son, who Jewel is bearing, is going to die. She's going to be killed. Whether she'll ever be able to even give birth to him or not is up for grabs. It could or could not happen, but most certainly he would want this child dead immediately because it's a disgrace. And Grimmar agrees to send Jewel back because it means peace for the orcs, even though they have this relationship that they've been building. Okay, so I don't know what to think about the Grimmar making that decision, but what I don't like is Jewel's reaction, because to me it's like, why the fuck wasn't she like, fuck you, motherfucker, get the fuck out of here? I just was like, what do you mean? And then they still sleep together multiple times at night? No, fuck no. What the fuck? I'm sorry. I'm like, what? No, that's not going to happen. I can't see that. If Jewel herself was like, I'm going to go back to this abusive husband of mine because you're trying to make peace, okay, like she sees the sacrifice, okay. But he had been talking about how much he wanted a son and all sort of stuff, and how he wanted it to have with her, and she was special to him. Grimmar saying this to Jewel, and she really wanted to stay with him, and she even like stood up for him in front of her people, which was very disgraceful, sort of appearing to her to the other humans, and all this stuff, and then just him say, well, I'm going to send you back to him, and he's definitely going to kill my child, and you're probably going to have a horrible life. And I understand that Grimmar wants that peace with the orcs, but I'm just like, if Grimmar makes that decision, okay, fine. But for Jewel to just be like, well, I still care about you, and I still want to have sex with you 3 or 4 more times tonight, even though it'll be sad goodbye sex. No. I don't know. I didn't like that. I felt like those scenes were just there because we wanted these sad goodbye sex scenes. I just feel like she would have been like, she was so aggressive or forward thinking, and expressing herself in other scenes previous to this, and I just feel like this would have been a time that she would have really kind of told him, get the hell out of here, go away, I can't believe you would do this. There should have been a fight. She should have like yelled at him and drove him away and shamed him. I don't know, that seemed really weird to me, but okay, so we move on to the next scene. The next scene is where Jewel finally is taken back to Lord Nor, and Lord Nor and Jewel are now, she's been left, right? That's it. Now she's under his control again, and it just felt very, I don't know. I mean, there was like this sense of like, oh no, what's going to happen? And that initial scene where he just kind of smacks her a couple times, and she gets in the carriage, it just felt really weak. His Lord Nor's dialogue felt super, super weak. I know Jewel was trying to come forward as a very strong character, but it didn't pay off because Lord Nor was so pathetically written. His what he had to say and the way he acted just didn't seem very interesting or very, I had this sort of sense of dread, and that's what I meant. Is like, I was like, when I found this out, I was like, even though I kind of saw that she was going to have to go back to him, I had this sort of like, kind of the sense of dread. What is he going to do? How is he going to be? Not that I wanted to see Jewel abused. I didn't, but I just, you knew that was going to be a tense scene. And it was a very, very underwhelming in that sense. And I think that scene needed more. It needed better dialogue from Lord Nor, which was very soft in my opinion. He seemed almost, he almost talked in a sense, almost very modern. The way his speech changed to something very, very up to date. And whereas Jewel still kind of held on slightly to some slightly archaic sort of language, which it just felt weird. That felt weird, and his dialogue was just not good. It just wasn't very well written. I don't know what happened there. I thought it was very weak, and I thought that really undersold a scene that was I was so primed for that scene to really, really hook me, and I think that was kind of a missed opportunity. The last is when Grimar shows up and rescues Jewel, and the whole scene that happens there, without getting into a lot of detail, man, it seemed contrived. I mean, it was a whole lot of like, well, okay, this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen, and oh, I was always going to do this, and we did this, and everything, and it's just like, I just was shaking my head thinking, no, that doesn't make any what? This guy still did this. You're going to go back with this guy? He still voluntarily gave you up. Oh, I was following you. I don't buy it. Come on. And in that sense, I think and there was a sense too, slightly in all this story of maybe not entirely a healthy relationship, right? Grimar often spoke about what he liked about Jewel, and it was often about like, you give me great pleasure, and I know that part of that meant like happiness and joy, but a lot of times it was just like, I like it when we screw, is kind of like what he was saying, and it's like, okay, and it's like, is Jewel really swayed that heavily by that? It just didn't. It seemed like what he kept saying was like, well, don't you just want to have sex with me? And like I said, that ending I found very contrived. So it's unfortunate. It makes me really question whether I would necessarily go on to another book in this series or another Finley Finn book. It might be really early in the writing career that she has, so it could be that later books, that stuff kind of gets ironed out, So if that's the case, then maybe I would come back at another time. But I'm not going to say this wasn't a bad book, and that's another thing I need to say. This isn't a bad book. I think it did what it meant to do. It just, I guess why I'm a little frustrated is that it was a good book, and that if you're into the genre, I think that you would probably like it, even though there were some contrived elements. But I really feel like it had the opportunity to be a better book without a whole lot more added in, and it would have made that ending, that final ending back at Orc Mountain, it would have made that ending all that more powerful and sexy. A book that is heavy into exhibitionism. Orcs are big into being exhibitionist. Okay. This is what they are. There was another thing. There was a lot of how do you say this? How do you say this without getting too crude? There's a lot of fluid. That's it. Thanks for more videos about Orc Fluid. Probably not here, but who knows? I mean, nothing's set in stone. There could always be a return to Orc Mountain.